Hey there, hey friends, Ken here, your Thrifty Apprentice, and today we are venturing into the world of watercolor techniques again as we concentrate on our fourth watercolor technique video. This joyous trip today dives into the wonders of blending. I want to share with you some really cool tips that might just make blending a little easier for you while on your artistic journey. The first thing that I want to share about blending is that it works best when blending two wet areas. To make them one, simply use a damp brush to touch one area and slowly zigzag until it meets the second area. I would also suggest trying to keep the water level the same in the areas you are blending. Now, this will help prevent dry patches, and do not be scared to go over a blended area more than once. You will also want to pick up any puddles if you have them. Simply clean and tap the water out of your brush. Then you can set it in the puddle to suck up the water. This brings me to bleeding. This is a form of blending that I suggest all artists give a try. This method involves dripping wet paint into a wet paint, allowing one to naturally bleed and blend into the other. Again, you want to try to keep your water levels about the same. This type of blending works wonders when trying to achieve a natural blend for subjects such as botanicals, portraits, and landscapes. Next is wet into dry blending. I usually use this method of blending for adding shadows. If an area has dried too quickly, or if I am creating a composition requiring layers. This method involves adding a wash of color to already dry color and then using a damp, clean brush to blend the edges to help prevent hard lines. This gives the blend a more natural looking transition. If all else fails, you can always wet the entire area again. That way, you can then get a wet into wet blend. You see, paper choice makes a huge difference in blending as well. Budget papers with no cotton content tend to dry faster and can cause what you are painting to dry in patches. This can be especially true for large washes, backgrounds, and compositions with lots of little sections. Now, there are some really good budget papers out there, yet they all tend to dry faster than their more cotton counterparts. Cotton paper, on the other hand, retains the water and stays wet much longer. This gives you time to work at a slower pace and achieve the blend you want. Because it dries slower, it helps with the allowing of time to eliminate any puddles, avoiding patches and hard edges. I will also point out that paper choice is probably the most important supply in general when it comes to water-soluble creation. So friends, as we move into the demo to explore the different methods of blending that we have been talking about, let me give you a supply list. So first up, we of course are using HWC, which is Holbein Professional Watercolors. I have been testing them out for a while now, and I do believe that I am finally ready to go ahead and put together a review video. So you can stay tuned and look forward to that coming out on the channel, hopefully by the end of this year, maybe the beginning of next year. I am painting on 100% cotton, cold press paper. The company that produces it is Potenate, but I actually purchased it under the Lightwish storefront on Amazon. As I've told you before, Lightwish is more of a distribution seller that carries many different products ranging from Arctics to Paul Rubens, Marie's, and you can also find plenty of different papers from the Chinese market listed there as well. So the book itself is what, maybe 3.5 by 4. It's a pretty small painting, but it gives you more than enough room to do your blending technique practice. Now, throughout the course of this painting, you're really going to see me employing the third blending technique that we talked about more than any of the rest of them, and that is the dry into wet blending technique. You see, I am a painter that likes to layer, and really transparent layers when you're doing a composition can help lend to a more realistic-ish, notice the ish, look. I'm never really going for true realism, but I am trying to push myself more and more with each layer to get it more realistic looking, so that without a doubt, you can pick up on the concept of what I'm trying to portray. Now, I initially started off in this particular composition using a more wet into wet blending. Now, although I did not use the zigzag motion we talked about earlier to combine two wet areas, I was doing the bleeding technique where I put down a layer of color and then was allowing a darker, more saturated shadow layer to drop into that wet wash and bleed or blend naturally into themselves. You're going to see me do some dry brushing. You're going to see me do some dry to wet painting. This little composition actually employs many different, and I do mean many different watercolor techniques that we have talked about both in today's video and in the past. Everything from blending, glazing, wet in the wet. The only thing we're not covering at this point is silhouette. But that's for another video, right? Right. So I decided to go with sort of a non-traditional color scheme. Although I'm painting a holiday photo, or should I say photo, a holiday composition, I still wanted to kind of keep the colors a little different. I went with a yellow for the bow. I'm going with the red for the jingle bell, of course. The ribbon that's holding the jingle bell, I decided to go with purple, especially since it offset yellow and they make each other look more vibrant. And then, of course, you have the green of the holly leaves, which offsets the red of the jingle bell because they're opposite each other. Now, I started to think to myself, to keep color harmony, that I would just stick to those 4 colors and mix and match back and forth between those 4 to make sure that everything blended together seamlessly and it didn't look like it was unprofessional or maybe super amateurish, because there were just so many different colors without any harmony thrown all over the paper. Now, at this point, you'll see that I am using that layering technique where I'm laying down color. Then I'm going to go in with a wet, damp, clean brush to blend the ends of those colors together, helping to prevent those patches from drying too hard or harsh lines from forming. Now, when blending, there comes a time when you may have to switch from one blending technique to employ another blending technique. In this instance, I went in with the third technique we talked about, which was the dry or the wet into dry blending. And as I started to, I noticed that the bottom layer of my paint seemed to be lifting a little bit, and I was starting to get a bit of a patchy area. So I re-wet the entire area that I was painting, in essence switching from a wet into dry blending to wet into wet blending, where I was now dropping that wet paint into a wet area, which would lead to bleeding and allow the colors to merge and blend together more seamlessly. Again, the main target being to avoid the dry patches and any hard lines. Now, I did mention earlier that this paper was a little different for me. Although it is a 100% cotton cold pressed paper, or that's what it's advertised to be, I did notice that it has the tendency to have some hot press characteristics to it as far as its drying is concerned. Some areas that seem to stay wet longer than other areas of the paper. Now, of course, that could be due to some uneven sizing in the paper, or maybe I touched an area with my hands which were oily, or maybe had lotion on it as I was setting up to shoot this part of the video. But for whatever the case or whatever the reason, I was experiencing situations where I had the paint drying much harder than I feel like, or much harsher than I feel like it should have been drying for this to be a cold press paper. So at this point in the video, you have seen us use our wet into wet blending. Although we didn't blend two colors, we did blend wet paint into a wet area. We've used our bleeding, where we've dropped wet paint into wet paint and let them naturally blend together. And here I'm once again employing the dry or the wet dry blending method. So basically I'm putting down the color that I needed for shadow around the bow in order to add roundness and body to it. And then I'm going in with a wet damp brush in order to blend the ends where that wet paint was into the dry, so that there won't be any dry patches or any harsh lines. And that is the blending technique, as I said earlier, that I use throughout probably about 83, 84, 85% of this entire composition. Now here I'm just going to do a little cleanup work and get everything round and symmetrical. Go in and do any last color corrections that I feel like I needed. And even if I need to add another layer to things, I'll do that as well. So at this point, I am just going to do a little bit of lifting in order to get some highlights on the bottom of my jingle bells in order to give it a little bit more of a vintage feel. And then I'm going to go in with my bleed proof white and some white gouache. Well, bleed proof is white gouache in order to add highlights to everything else. Guys, this was really fun. Hopefully you picked up on the concept of what we were talking about, even though some of the information may have just been surface level. If you found anything helpful, don't forget to sprinkle a little love, give the video a thumbs up, share. Sharing is caring. If you're new and you haven't, do go ahead and subscribe, hit that notification bell so you'll know when we go upload and when we go live. Jump in the comment section. Let me guys know, what do you think about blending, the different methods that you employ, how they work for you, and if you happen to have picked up on something from this video. You can check the video description for all of the relevant links, Patreon, the website, the Facebook group, and anything and everything you love about the Thrifty Apprentice community. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'll see you back here Sunday for our next video. And remember, as I always tell you, just keep creating.